Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar to review the addendum to the draft final proposal. This is for the 2018 Interconnection Process Enhancements Initiative. My name is Christina Osborne. I work in Stakeholder Affairs here at the ISO. I'll be facilitating the web conference today. I have a few other ISO representatives in the room. I'll go ahead and have them introduce themselves, and then we'll go over the agenda.
This is Bill Weaver from Legal.
Bob Rivers, Grid Assets. Jason Foster, Interconnection Resources.
Matt Chambers, Interconnection Resources.
Deb Levine, Infrastructure Contracts and Management.
Julie Balch, Grid Assets. Linda Wright, Interconnection Resources.
Great. Thank you, everybody. So after I go over the stakeholder process and schedule, I'm going to turn it over to Linda Wright. She's going to provide an introduction, also review this background and scope for the initiative. And then we have Jason Foster and Matt Chambers. Here they're going to go over the interconnection financial security and cost responsibility topics, as well as the interconnection request acceptance and validation criteria. And then I'll go over the next steps for this initiative. This is an addendum to the draft final proposal that was posted on November 15th. I'm going to go over the next steps at the end, but the plan is to take it to the ISO Board of Governors in February. So the presentation that we're reviewing today is out on the Interconnection Process Enhancements webpage. You'll find the link to that page on the Stakeholder Processes page under Stay Informed tab on our website. We are recording today's meeting. We will make that recording available on the initiative webpage. Look for that probably early next week since it's a holiday. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Linda.
Okay, great. Welcome, everybody, today. Thank you for joining us on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. We appreciate that. The 2018 IFA initiative's goal is to modify and or clarify the generator interconnection process to keep it in line with industry changes and to meet customer needs. This is the fourth IFA process. There's an original IFA that was completed in 2014, but a 2015 IFA that was completed in 2016, and 2017 IFA that was completed in March of 2018. This 2018 IFA started with 42 potential topics, and we finally whittled it down to about 25 in the straw proposal, with 8 finalized and actually zeroed in on 17 to actually address. This addendum further explores one final item, which is item 7.1, and also includes 2 new items. So we're excited to hear about those today. So as Christina said earlier, the 7.1 maximum cost responsibility for network upgrades and potential network upgrades is going to be covered by Jason Foster. And our new items are related to the interconnection request acceptance and validation criteria, which Matt Chambers will be covering. Matt joined the ISO in July of 2018 as an interconnection specialist, and we're happy to have him along.
All right. And like Linda mentioned, thank you everybody for being here this afternoon. We appreciate your time and effort in this process. Before I kick this off, we're going to start with the definitions that we've proposed in the paperwork. But before I get into that, I just want to address, and let you know that we heard the stakeholder feedback from both the draft final paper as well as the previous papers, and we feel like the proposal that we have in front of you today and in the paper that was published, a fair, reasonable, and balanced solution to the interconnection customer's request as well as the PTO request, and we just feel like this is a really good balance between all of the input that we have and overall improvement of the process. So with that, we'll kick it off with the definitions and acronyms that will be used today. And hopefully in the future. We'll start it off with assigned network upgrades. These are upgrades that the interconnection customers have direct cost responsibility for. And important to note, they are not ANUs until they're converted, which we'll get into more of those details here shortly. Conditionally assigned network upgrades are upgrades that for cost responsibility, where a cost responsibility is assigned to an earlier interconnection customer, but may fall to a later or current interconnection customer. Interconnection service network upgrades, ISNUs, also known as plan of service upgrades, are RNUs at the point of interconnection to achieve the physical interconnection of the project. Important to note that assigned network upgrades and conditionally assigned network upgrades can be identified as interconnection service network upgrades. Precursor network upgrades are required for an interconnection customer where the upgrade cost responsibility is assigned to an earlier interconnection customer that has posted its third financial security posting. I'll get into more details on that point here shortly. It also includes network upgrades that are approved in the CAISO transmission plan. And current cost responsibility is the sum of the interconnection customer's current allocated cost for assigned network upgrades, and this cost will not exceed the maximum cost responsibility. The current cost responsibility is also used to calculate the project or customer's interconnection financial security requirement or posting. The maximum cost responsibility is defined by the lower sum of the interconnection customer's assigned network upgrade costs from its Phase 1 and Phase 2 interconnection studies. And this cost can be adjusted in subsequent reassessments when conditionally assigned network upgrades convert to assigned network upgrades. Again, I'll get into a little bit of detail here shortly. Maximum cost exposure is defined as the sum of the interconnection customer's maximum cost responsibility that I just mentioned and the lower sum of the conditionally assigned network upgrades from the Phase 1 and Phase 2 studies, interconnection studies. All right. Again, like I previously mentioned, we listened to the stakeholder feedback. We feel like this proposal establishes a good solution to the issues that were raised. In this proposal, we separately define those upgrades that are directly assigned to a project and those that may potentially become assigned to a project. And in the same sense, we separately defined cost responsibilities for those upgrades by establishing a maximum cost responsibility for direct assigned upgrades and a maximum cost exposure that includes the maximum or the direct assigned as well as the upgrades that could potentially become assigned to that project. We eliminated headroom issues that we previously proposed with conditionally assigned and assigned network upgrades by adjusting the MCR and MCE appropriately throughout the process. And again, we have some examples and further definition here shortly. We also established a fixed cost concept for conditionally assigned network upgrades for the sole purpose of adjusting the MCR and MCE. And this proposal also proposes to shift the PTO cost responsibility from the execution of a generator interconnection agreement to the point at which the project provides third financial security posting. All right, and we'll take a few slides here to review the cost responsibility framework that was proposed. Again, interconnection customers are assigned two upgrades. They're assigned network upgrades or conditionally assigned network upgrades. And important to note here that either one of the two upgrades can be identified as interconnection service network upgrades. And the cost allocation specifically for assigned network upgrades will be, or will follow Appendix DD, Sections 8.3 for RNUs, typically including short circuit related impacts, and Section 8.4 for LDNUs, which typically identify flow impacts. Important to note that the interconnection service network upgrades will be allocated at 100% of the upgrade cost to the maximum cost responsibility. And for current cost responsibility for ISNUs and for posting financial security posting requirements, the clusters will share in the cost equally of those upgrades with other projects in the same cluster. Moving on to cost allocations for conditionally assigned network upgrades. We broke this up into the two phases of the study. In the Phase 1 study report, conditionally assigned network upgrades are allocated 100% of the upgrades cost. Then in Phase 2, the cost allocations will follow current tariff provisions in Appendix DD, again 8.3 and 8.4 like I just mentioned. and interconnection service network upgrades would be assigned 100% of the upgrades cost towards the maximum cost exposure. So two things can happen with conditionally assigned network upgrades. They can either be removed from a project's responsibility, or they can become assigned network upgrades when all prior cluster projects withdraw without providing their third financial security posting. And one of the examples of a CANU being removed from a project is when it becomes a precursor network upgrade, or PNU, when at least one prior cluster provides its third financial security posting for that upgrade. And then a project's phase, so following the concept of the fixed cost approach in the phase 2 study, the project's phase 2 study will establish a fixed cost for each CANU for, again, the sole purpose of adjusting the MCR and MCE throughout the project's life. The examples are, at the time a CANU converts to an ANU, the maximum cost responsibility would increase by that fixed cost of that upgrade. And in this situation, the maximum cost exposure would remain unchanged. At the time CANU is removed from a project's responsibility, the maximum cost exposure would be reduced by that fixed cost amount of that upgrade. And in this situation, the maximum cost responsibility would remain unchanged. Like I previously mentioned, the maximum cost responsibility is defined by the lower sum of the assigned network upgrades from the phase 1 and phase 2 studies, and the maximum cost exposure is defined as by the sum of the maximum cost responsibility and the lower sum of the CANUs from the phase 1 and phase 2 study. And then financial security is only posted for assigned network upgrades, not for conditionally assigned or precursor network upgrades. There's really no easy way to summarize this first bullet, so I'm just going to go ahead and read it out loud. After a CANU is converted to an ANU, all ANU cost allocations are recalculated based on the number of remaining projects that have cost responsibility for the ANU. The summary of the project, the sum of the project's revised ANU cost allocations are assigned to the project, and any costs that exceed the MCR become the responsibility of the PTO. And then lastly, the maximum cost responsibility adjustments will continue to be based on Appendix DD, Section 7.4. So wanted to mention one last thing before we get into the examples here. Consistent with what we provided in the amended draft final proposal, historically we've generally seen a significant number of projects withdraw from the queue between phase 1 and phase 2. And as a result of this, in this proposal, as we considered various options and how we could structure this, we determined that if we adjust the proposal, we could be in a situation where, where we have cost allocations being defined by the phase 1 studies, and then if projects withdraw, it then changes the allocations in the phase 2 study. And we feel like that's a potential gaming situation where developers could submit multiple projects only to dilute the phase 1 study costs and change the allocation approach as we move forward. And the proposal that we have in front of you eliminates that opportunity. Okay, before we get into the examples of and situations, we'll pause here for questions. Marvin?
Yeah. So yes, so if you do have a question, you can raise your hand by pressing #2, and just a reminder to introduce yourself first, please. So Marvin, do we have anybody in the queue?
Yes, we do have a question in the queue. I'll go ahead and unmute that.
Thank you.
Paul, your line is unmuted.
Yeah, hi. I'm Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Susan.
Hi. Well, I have a lot of questions, but let me start with a larger question. Then I have a fair number of detailed questions. First of all, do you have, this almost seems like possibly a problem in search or a solution in search of a problem. Do you have any idea for projects that have dropped out or, upgrades that the PTOs have had to finance compared to the amount of penalty money, for example, that's been forfeited when people drop out? Do you have any idea how that all nets out? Has the PTOs been significantly disadvantaged by the current rules? Do you know that for sure?
So I'm not sure what you mean by the PTOs being disadvantaged, but I can say that the amounts of money that go to the PTOs through the non-refundable funds process is not a very large amount, not a very large percentage of the remaining cost of any particular upgrade. So while it does offset the cost, but it's not very much.
Okay, but do you know how many upgrades the PTOs have been forced to fund? And again, it would be a financing cost, not a total cost. But do you know what the cost to the PTOs has been for upgrades that they've had to fund because projects dropped out and those upgrades were still needed, and we're not able to be assigned to any later clusters? So projects where earlier two projects that assigned a GIA and then dropped out, and then the PTOs had to fund the upgrades. Do you know if that is, if the amount of financing cost for that is more or less than the cost of the penalty money that's been forfeited? Because normally when people drop out, a lot of times the upgrades drop out also, or if they drop out without signing a GIA, of course, then you can assign it to the later clusters. So my question is, do you know, let's, for example, postponing the benchmark to the posting the third posting, is that going to significantly protect the PTOs more? Have they suffered losses under the current structure where a GIA execution was the benchmark? I guess I'm sort of wondering, what is the nature and extent of the problem that we are trying to solve here?
Yeah, Susan, this is Bill. It's a good, fair question. When I look at this, I think the real issue that we've been struggling with a lot lately is interconnection customer reticence to have these, what we're now calling conditionally assigned network upgrades in their max cost responsibility. These types of upgrades that can move from cluster to cluster where a GIA is assigned.
Right. Now that's sort of a different question. Because I think you guys have already gone ahead and assigned those to people based on the tariff. And as far as I know, no one has actually challenged you at FERC about that. So you have interpreted it in a way that allows people to be assigned those costs, and you've gone ahead and assigned those costs and raised the maximum cost responsibility for it. So you're doing that already. You don't need a tariff change in your interpretation to do that, right?
No, we don't need a tariff change, but avoiding a FERC complaint isn't the goal. We're trying to be transparent here about what we're doing, and that's the purpose of all this, to be transparent, to have it much more clear, less ambiguous, very out in the open in what is your exact max cost responsibility, current cost responsibility for postings, because it's just not as tight and transparent as it could be, and that's what we're trying to do.
And that's understandable, okay, and that is understandable. But my question is more, you're going further than that. You're assigning 100% of each CANU, for example, to each customer, each project, which is something that's not currently done. You're postponing the demarcation from execution of a GIA to posting of a third financial security posting. That's going beyond clarifying. I think the clarifying is understandable and probably is an improvement. You are going beyond that, though, and you are putting more risk on the suppliers. And my question is, are you doing that because the PTOs have suffered losses or financial penalties, or not penalties, financial losses in some way under the current structure, where you are assigning just a proportional share of the CANUs right now, and the posting demarcation or the demarcation for PTO responsibility is the execution of a GIA? Or have those where you're going beyond clarification, but you're actually changing things substantively? Have the PTO suffered financial losses because they are the way they are now, as opposed to the way that you're proposing them to be?
Well, a lot of questions in there.
Sorry.
We're happy to address. I know we're happy to address this more comprehensively in written comments, and these are all appropriate questions. I would say yes, PTOs are picking up costs where we don't think the tariff says that they should be. That's answer one, first and foremost. But second, again, I don't think whether the PTOs are suffering disproportionate losses is the benchmark we're trying to meet. I think what we're trying to do is make sure the tariff works as it's designed and that the PTOs don't face these risks where they shouldn't. We want interconnection customers financing the cost upgrades that they rely on for interconnection.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you'll get considerable written comments on this, but let me go back to some of the detailed questions just to be sure I understand the proposal. The potential gaming that you're referring to, I'm going to ask the same question I did with your other potential gaming issue with RMUs, where you actually decided there was not any potential gaming. Have you seen any sign that people are loading up the phase 2 studies, that the same developer puts a bunch of projects in there only for them to drop out so that the cost allocation is less later? Have you detected any gaming potential or any actual gaming by any developers who you think has actually done this?
Susan, this is Bob. This is actually a new proposal, so we couldn't have seen any potential gaming up to this point in time.
Well,
really, the way that we designed it, well, let me just finish, is that we
yeah, sure, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Really felt that there's a balance between, going with the minimum of an allocated cost from phase 1 and an allocated cost from phase 2. It's always going to be the phase 1 cost, and in this case, this is not the way that we're currently doing it. We are currently relying on the phase 2 allocations to provide to the customer for what their cost responsibilities are for a CANU. So that's consistent, and so we wanted to provide a process that really we thought had the appropriate balance.
Okay, well, so is the answer that first of all, they could be doing this now, say, for regular phase 1 and phase 2 studies for assigned upgrades. So they could put a whole bunch of projects into phase 1 and get a low-cost allocation, and then the phase 2 would be higher after everybody dropped out, assuming the upgrades are still needed. But do you see any sign that anyone has actually done that?
Well, let me answer it this way, that when a project gets into their phase 1 study, they don't, unless they've done some significant work on their own, doing some engineering analysis, don't really know what the upgrades are going to be. You don't know how many projects are going to come into the cluster. But what you do know is that there may be potential for a CANU that's very large that's sitting out there that you're going to need. And so there is that opportunity to actually do that gaming in that circumstance more than just the standard, well, there may be a big upgrade coming, so I'm going to, potentially add some more projects to a particular study to get my costs down.
Okay, because really what you're proposing here is that the cost allocation for a CANU, because you're putting 100% of the cost for each project in the phase 1, the cost allocation for a CANU is potentially way more punitive than the cost allocation for a regular defined upgrade is actually triggered by the cluster without any evidence that projects will really go through and pay $250,000, put together, go through all the trouble and all the modeling and all the work. It's a big deal to put together an interconnection request and load it up somehow so that they will end up with lower projects later, or lower costs for a CANU that may even fall out and may never be assigned to them. It's a bit of a stretch, so I'll put this in probably some kind of written comments, but without some evidence that people would actually do this, really the question is the same as the earlier question with respect to the RMUs. That it's a stretch and for something that may never happen to them, and I think that's something you probably will want to perhaps consider. Okay, let me ask a couple of now more sort of just calculation questions. When you say that the CANU there's going to be a fixed cost for a CANU in the phase 2 study, or the lower phase 1, and a lower phase 1 and phase 2, there's no chance that the phase 2 study is going to be any higher, right? Because the phase 1 was only 100% assigned to every project, right? So how would the phase 2 be lower?
That was our assumption as well. We just defined it as lower of the phase 1 and phase 2 in the event that we had a unique situation.
Well, how unique could it get? I mean, you can't have any more projects in phase 2 than you had in phase 1.
We would expect the phase 2 to be lower. Right. That's the out, yeah. We just defined it consistent with how we define it today.
Okay. All right. I mean, it certainly isn't going to be any higher. It could be the same if you have the same number of projects, but it would never be any lower. Or, excuse me, it would never be any higher in phase 2. I'm sorry, let me say that again. Never be any low, yeah, it would never be any higher in phase 2. That was right. Okay, right?
That's what we're thinking, yes.
Okay. Could the cost of a single CANU, let's say a reconductor line X, and is phase 1, and then you're saying phase 2 you have also reconductor line X, could the cost of, the total cost of that CANU go up in phase 2?
No. So the examples that I have here shortly will define some of this. So the CANU defined in phase 1 and phase 2, that phase 2 costs cannot go up above the 100%. The cost that's identified in the phase 2 would be fixed for the purpose of adjusting the MCR or MCE based on what happens with that CANU. Once a CANU is converted to an ANU, that ANU, then the cost of that ANU would then be allocated its appropriate amount within other ANUs within the
I'm going to get to that in a minute. So the cost to reconductor line X in phase 1, then when you get to phase 2, the cost to reconductor line X cannot be any higher than in total than it was in phase 1. That's right?
The cost of it is actually established in a prior cluster study. So it's not going to change.
Okay. All right. So let me ask another question then. If the current cluster is a later queue cluster, it's going to be coming online later than the earlier cluster to which that CANU was assigned. Would there be escalation applied? Let's say that earlier cluster was going to come online, or let's say the in-service date for that, whatever that CANU was 2001, or excuse me, 2021. And then the later queue cluster, it wouldn't be going into service say till 2023 or something. Can there be escalation if the dates change? And so the cost could go up from what the original identified cost was?
I think there's a possibility to do that, but I think this is an area that we probably need to provide some more clarity on. But the way that the paper's written is that the cost of the CANU would actually, when it's converted from a CANU to an ANU, would be that fixed cost. But once it's in that the realm of an ANU, and that at that point the prior projects have withdrawn, and it's now under the requirement of the current cluster. In that case, if it's got a later online date and construction of the ANU is actually delayed, those costs could then flow to that current cluster.
Okay, so there could be some escalation of costs if there's a delay in the CANU, if the current cluster doesn't need it as soon as the other one.
Right.
Okay. All right. Now, what is the reason for reshuffling all of the ANU cost allocations just because you're adding one CANU, which may not even be that high of a cost, but you've got the regular other cost allocations already fixed. What is the reason for reshuffling all of the ANU cost allocations, and on what basis will you do that?
I don't think we are reshuffling it, so I'm not sure I'm understanding the question, but maybe we ought to hold off until we get into the examples where we'll be showing some specific numbers.
Let me read what this says here. After a CANU is converted to an ANU, all ANU cost allocations are recalculated. All ANU cost allocations. It doesn't say just you're going to allocate the CANU in some way. It says you're going to recalculate all of the ANU cost allocations, and I'm wondering what does that mean, and why would you do that?
Yeah, well, let's go to the examples to explain that, but it's really trying to elaborate on the current process, that when you go into a reassessment and some particular upgrades may go away and actually create headroom for changing costs of the remaining network upgrades, it's just explaining, or at least it was attempting to explain that situation, just as it plays out today in the reassessment.
Okay, so that isn't necessarily reshuffling all of the ANU cost allocations. It's simply what normally happens in a reassessment it's not something that, and which may not be any change, right? I mean, that statement is just really confusing. So I'll wait until you go through the examples. But that was, I sort of read that about 4 times. And why would they change the current cost allocations? So first of all, you're talking about a reassessment. You're not talking about after it's converted, which I guess you're saying would happen in a reassessment. Is that the idea?
A CANU only gets converted to an ANU. Well, I guess it could happen within the at the phase 2 study, but yeah, typically what happened is part of the reassessment.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, continue to keep that question in mind, and I'll ask it again after you're done with the examples. As I said, it's not clear, but let me let you go through the examples. And thanks very much.
On questions until
okay.
you go through the examples.
Yeah, let's pause on questions, and then let's get through some of these examples. Maybe we'll answer some questions through this, and we'll open it up again for questions here shortly. Okay. So this first example, fairly straightforward, hopefully. We see here that the, can I see the mouse?
Of course.
Okay. So we can see here that the maximum cost responsibility is established at $9 million by the sum of the phase 2 assigned network upgrades, each of $3 million. We can see that the sum of the CANUs here is $14 million based on the sum of the phase 2 study results at $14 million. So therefore, the sum of the MCR and the sum of the CANUs establishes the maximum cost exposure at $23 million. All right. Example 2A, we have a situation where CANU 1 is converted in the first reassessment to ANU 4. So here we can see the original, the established MCR at $9 million, the conversion of that ANU to ANU 4, and then in the reassessment we also see a change in the allocation costs for ANU 2 and 3 for a total of $4 million. So here we have a situation where the total ANU costs, how do I go backwards? The total ANU cost is above or exceeds the maximum cost responsibility defined, and in this situation, that cost above the MCR would be borne by the PTO. So in this situation, we can see that because the CANU was converted to an ANU, the maximum cost exposure remains unchanged. All right. Example 2B. In this situation, we have a CANU that was removed from a project's responsibility. Here we can see CANU 2 now has in the reassessment now has a value of $0. It's removed. The result of that is the maximum cost exposure is reduced by that fixed cost amount from the phase 2 study. In this case, $4 million. So now we have a new maximum cost exposure defined at $19 million. In this situation, we do not have an ANU that was converted, a CANU that was converted to an ANU. Therefore, the maximum cost responsibility remained unchanged at $9 million. And again, we can see the sum of the ANUs exceeds the maximum cost responsibility. Again, that cost would be borne by the PTO.
And before we get off that, Jason, just to go back to the 2A slide, you can see that the maximum cost responsibility from phase 2 over to the reassessment only went up by the amount of the CANU that was converted to the ANU. So when we have additional, or some of the ANU cost allocations went up because some projects withdrew, it's still underneath the cost cap of the $9 million from phase 2 plus the $6 million from the CANU that was converted. So now that sets the new MCR at $15 million, and you can see in this case, kind of what Susan was referring to as reshuffling. This is taking a look at the new cost responsibilities at this point of the reassessment, and a portion of those costs are actually above the MCR line, which do become the cost responsibility of the PTO. So hopefully that answers your question, Susan. then we'll get to open it up to questions after we get through all the examples. Okay, and then for example 3, the chart and the description are on 2 different pages. I'm going to keep it on the chart slide, and hopefully you have a paper copy you can refer to the directions or follow along. So here we have a little more complex situation or scenario where we have various results and impacts to both the maximum cost responsibility and the maximum cost exposure. We understand that some of the situations may be extremes in certain scenarios or situations, but we wanted to provide this example as a way to kind of be transparent and an understanding of how this situation or these situations could play out. So starting in phase 1 and phase 2, similar as before, we have the maximum cost responsibility established at $9 million by the sum of the phase 2 study results and the sum of the CAN-Us at $14 million. Therefore, the MCR plus the CAN-Us establishes the maximum cost exposure at $23 million. In reassessment 1, we have a few things happening. First, we have I'll start with CAN-U 2 here. So CAN-U 2 is removed from a project's responsibility, and the result of that is a reduction in the maximum cost exposure of that $4 million established in phase 2, and the new MCE is $19 million. The second thing occurs is a CAN-U is converted to an ANU. Again, we see a maximum cost responsibility increase by that cost established in the phase 2 here, $6 million, to a new MCR at $15 million. The third thing that occurs is a cost increase of the ANU 2 and ANU 3 costs of a total of $4 million. And like I previously mentioned, that cost pushes the total ANU cost above the maximum cost responsibility, which is then borne by the PTO. And then in reassessment 2, we have a situation where the ANU 1 and ANU 2 costs have been removed, or the cost responsibility has been removed from this project, and we see a total reduction of the total ANU costs for the project. And in this situation, the maximum cost responsibility is reduced following Appendix DD, Section 7.4, down to the $10 million total cost of the ANU. Also, we'll note here that the maximum cost exposure remains unchanged at $19 million. The purpose of maintaining this maximum cost exposure is to provide transparency to the true cost exposure for a project at any given point in the study process. So again, like Bill mentioned earlier, it's a way for us to be transparent and provide that true cost exposure to the project. Okay, and then in reassessment 3, we have a few things occurring. I'll start with this dark blue square. It's a new ANU being introduced into the project at a cost of $4 million. In this situation, the ANU cost is added to the total ANUs for this project. The second thing that occurs is this final CAN-U 3 is converted to an ANU, again at the same cost as identified in the phase 2 study, here being $4 million. So the adjustment to the MCR is going to be the sum of the previous maximum cost responsibility established. In this case, it was the MCR established in the reassessment 1 of $15 million, plus that $4 million CANU that was converted to an ANU for a new maximum cost responsibility of $19 million. Once that calculation is completed, we would then apply Tariff Appendix DD Section 7.4 to determine if the cost reduction meets that criteria. In this case, it does not meet that criteria. Therefore, the MCR is maintained at $19 million. The last thing I would mention is there are no longer any CANUs
assigned to this project, and the maximum cost exposure is no longer applicable. Yeah, okay. Bob has one more thing to say real quick.
Yeah, I just wanted to really speak to that last ANU that's brought in. It's a very rare circumstance where a brand new ANU is developed into reassessment. This is under the contingency where there's a system change that warrants, let me just kind of talk about the example that we've actually had in the past. Songs retired, and the projects that were in that area actually needed an additional network upgrade to be able to be interconnected reliably because of the loss of songs and some voltage issues that were occurring in the areas. An additional upgrade was needed. So under that very rare circumstance where a system change requires an additional network upgrade required for these projects, that's the example that we're trying to show. Again, it's very rare, but we want to just, as Jason's been saying, to be totally transparent, just to show out in kind of the worst case scenario how this could play out.
Yep.
Ready for questions?
All right, yeah, we'll open it up for questions.
So again, if you have a question, you can press #2 to raise your hand.
And we do have a question in the queue. Go to that line now.
Yeah, hi, Susan Schneider again, Phoenix Consulting. First of all, thank you, Bob, for that last bit because I was wondering what was going on with that example. So it would be good to if you're going to put that out there again, make it explicit, but I appreciate the explanation because my first thought was 7.4 doesn't allow you to do that. So, okay, that's helpful. Let me go back to your Romanet 3 here. If you could go to the written part because I had that, I was making notes on that right before. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so Roman numeral 3 there where it says in reassessment 2. I'm wondering if the CANU drops out, okay, then the maximum cost exposure goes down, right?
In reassessment 2.
Yeah, let's say in general.
Yeah, so if in reassessment 2 that CANU was removed, the maximum cost exposure would be reduced by the amount of that CANU established in phase 2. So in this case, the MCE would be reduced to 50.
Okay. So if the MCE goes down when a CANU drops out, why does the MCE not go down if an ANU drops out? If the MCR goes down from 5 to 10 million for your ANUs, okay, then why is it that the MCE stays the same? If the CANU drops out, it goes down, but if an ANU drops out, that amount is reduced, why does it not decline in that case?
Because, so we didn't provide for a reduction in MCE because there is a true cost exposure of $19 million because in 7.4, the MCR can be readjusted to the previously established MCR, and therefore the true maximum cost exposure of this project is $19 million as the example.
Well, okay, but that's only because that's how you're proposing it. I guess I'm asking why, right today under 7.4, unless in the absence of some catastrophic other thing, when your maximum cost exposure goes down or maximum cost responsibility goes down, it just goes down. It goes from, in this case, from 5 to 10 million. But what is the purpose? If the MCE is supposed to be what you're calling the true cost exposure, in the absence of a catastrophic change, and I'm not sure that has ever happened, but maybe you guys are aware more than I am, but they could go back up to that technically, but it is extraordinarily rare. It would seem like if you're going to reduce the MCE if a CANU drops out, you should also reduce the MCE for the MCR reduction. You can put a footnote in there that says, yes, if, a Diablo Canyon explodes, then, things will happen or whatever. But in general, that doesn't happen, and it's actually misleading, I think, to leave it in. Again, footnote it any way you want, but it seems like that, generally speaking, once it goes down, and the MCE should decline also.
Yeah, so certainly I understand your point. We considered the same in all of our discussions. We tabled it this way because really the ANUs could be reallocated during any reassessment, a greater cost. which would then adjust that maximum cost responsibility up or down within the maximum cost exposure. And again,
well, that's not what happens today. I mean, today, once your maximum cost responsibility goes down, if there's a reassessment that comes after, that lower cap is what applies, not something higher. If that's all it is, it's just a reassessment.
The 7.4 allows for the maximum cost responsibility to be reduced. However, in a subsequent reassessment, it can be increased back up to that original MCR. Right. And so if there's ANUs that are reallocated costs greater than what they were in the previous reassessment, that MCR can be increased back up.
No, the MCR, I thought 7.4 now, once you get it reduced, it's reduced. A subsequent reassess, because the conditions to get it reduced are so extreme. For example, you're already responsible for 100% of your costs. I mean, that sort of thing. So, of all the upgrades that you're assigned. So, I mean, it's a pretty extreme thing to be able to even get that reduction. And so if the MCR is reduced, then, pursuant to 7.4, unless there is a system change, then it doesn't go back up. It's not just a subsequent reassessment keeps that lower number, doesn't it?
No, I would, 7.4.
Go back to the slide of the charts. Susan, let me just describe a little bit what's going on here. If you look at phase 2, where the MCR was at $9 million, okay, that is the MCR that can never be exceeded. Okay?
Yes, understood.
And then, but how it gets up to the $19 million is you have 2 CANUs that became ANUs. So
understood.
if you add these two numbers up, the MCR, in essence, is used from the phase 2 of the $19 million because these two is basically assuming that, okay, if we would have known back in phase 2 that these 2 CANUs would become ANUs, the MCR would be at the $19 million level.
Right. So I understand increasing the MCR for the CANU reassignment.
So let me just finish. The additional item that, you're saying once 7.4 allows for the MCR to go down, it doesn't typically go up. Well, the reason is because it's designed in such a fashion that at that point, we make sure that the remaining network upgrades that are required for that project are allocated at 100% to that project, even if it's still sharing at that point. And if in that case the MCR still goes down, then we allow it to go down. So in that case, it never can go back up. So that's why you never see it go back up, because we've kind of protected ourselves that everybody is getting 100% allocation to allow it to go down in case those other projects do go away and that project still needs that remaining upgrade.
Right. So I'm not sure you're understanding my question. My question is Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, my question is, I understand that once you have an MCR of whatever it is for your ANUs, and then a CANU falls to that group, that your proposal would increase the MCR from that point. And I'm not asking why the MCR goes up or down. What I'm saying is the MCE that's here, okay, the MCE should also go down when the MCR goes down, because it's only in extremely, as you yourself have explained, only in very extremely rare cases would you go above that for some terrible system thing that happened. So the MCE, the cost responsibility for that project, 99.99% of the time, or whatever the number is going to be, the MCR should be lower. And so when you add the CANUs, you raise the MCR, and that's fine. I'm not questioning that in your proposal. I'm questioning why the MCE doesn't go down when the MCR goes down. Afterwards, you can't answer the CANUs to the MCR. That's in your proposal. It's the MCE I'm questioning, not the MCR. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so, provide your comments. The part of the problem here is we've got an MCR, we've got an MCE, and in this case, what we're really trying to say is the fact that the MCR could go up to the 19 million level, okay? So,
and I don't think that's true. I think when you take the MCR, which is now 5 million, and then you add on the CANUs, okay, then Yeah, okay, and I'll put it in comments. But I think you're taking away some of the benefit of 7.4 and that MCR reduction when you don't also reduce the MCE by the same amount, because the MCE is supposed to just leave room for the CANUs, which is fine. But if the MCR, well, I mean, which is certainly consistent with your proposal. But if the MCR goes down, you can still leave room for the CANUs, but the MCE should also decline to match it, and that's all I'm saying. So I'll put that in comments and maybe a few examples in there as well. But I think your MCE needs to go down when your MCR goes down. Otherwise, you're leaving room for more CANUs than you even need.
Well,
so that's
the point that we're trying to,
or you're reversing 7.4. It's one of those two.
So what we're trying to portray here, Susan, is if those CANUs had been ANUs in phase 2, the MCR originally would have been at $19 million, and the MCR can always go back up to the original MCR of $19 million under some very specific circumstances. That's what we're trying to portray here.
Okay, but if never mind. Okay, I'll put some examples in. I'm maybe not asking this clearly, so but thank you for giving it a try.
It's confusing, Susan. So we're just we'll move on.
Yeah, Susan,
yes,
check out Appendix CD, Section 7.4.3, 2. I think that'll clarify how the MCR will be adjusted back upward. And then
okay,
and then we look forward
to the MCR I'm questioning, it's the MCE, but I'll put that in comments. I think we've spent a lot of time on it, but thank you.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Marvin, do we have anybody else in the queue?
We do. I'll go to the next question. Caller, your line is unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
It's Gary Holdsworth at SCE. Glad to have an opportunity to ask my question. I'm interested in how the mechanics work in relation to Section 14.2.2. So that is a CANU that is executed. It's no longer going to be the execute of the GIA that will be the trigger. What we're talking about is the start of construction activities coinciding with the third posting. Correct? As far as this kicking, the CANUs kicking in?
That's
for
correct.
Purposes of determining, whether they are locked into a GIA?
That's correct.
That's my question.
So, yeah, Gary, so the point is a particular CANU would only become an ANU once the third posting is made by at least one project that is currently assigned those costs. So moving from the trigger being the GIA signing by at least one project who was originally assigned a cost allocation for an upgrade, now we're proposing that it moves to the point to where at least one project has to make their third posting.
The devil's in the details, obviously, when I see the actual language of the tariff, but in the tariff, will there be any reflection of the fact that a CANU being in a GIA alone does not necessarily mean it is in a GIA for purposes of 14.2.2?
This is Bill. I would rewrite 14.2.2 so it's not GIA dependent and it just speaks to third posting.
Right.
Okay. And I think the definition of CANU helps in this regard because we always had this concern that just because we had a contingency identified but not a responsibility in a GIA, that somehow that made it a condition precedent for a later queued generator that still relied on that upgrade. So I think with the definitions, and obviously I'm going to be interested in how the language in 14.2.2 changes, but with the definitions, I think the mechanism is better. I do appreciate you working on this to make it clearer. That's it.
Thanks for the feedback, Gary.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Any other questions, Marvin?
And I'm seeing no additional questions at the moment.
Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to Matt Chambers to discuss the interconnection request acceptance and validation criteria topics.
Great, thanks, Jason. Good afternoon, my name is Matt Chambers. I'm an interconnection specialist over here in the Interconnection Resources Group. And today I'll be discussing two new topics in our 2018 Interconnection Process Enhancements Initiative. We'll be discussing interconnection request acceptance and interconnection request validation criteria. So these came about from an internal review of the experiences of stakeholders in Cluster 11 in the validation process, as well as the experiences and challenges of the CAISO and PTOs in the validation process in clusters 10 and 11. So the first of the two topics here seeks to clarify the minimum requirements for an interconnection request that's submitted to be considered a complete interconnection request submittal. In recent application windows, the ISO has received interconnection request applications that were missing one or two components or had inconsistent information, which altogether made the validation process a bit more challenging for both the ISO and PTOs. Some of the specific examples were just missing files or errors in the power flow and dynamic models that were significant to the point where the models just didn't run. From these experiences, we determined that there's a need to clarify and specify minimum requirements for an interconnection request application to be considered a complete application. Going forward, we're proposing that interconnection application packages that are not deemed complete by the close of the cluster application window will not move on to the validation process. However, being mindful that there are circumstances that would make it so that the ISO or PTO will require a bit more time to review interconnection request applications, we're proposing to add a day-for-day extension should the ISO not be able to respond to an interconnection request submittal within 5 business days. Pardon me. So let's move on to the components of a complete interconnection request application. The first two are the gimmies. You have the study deposit and the demonstration of site exclusivity, either in the form of site exclusivity documentation or a deposit in lieu of site exclusivity. You have the completed Appendix 1, which is the interconnection request form that's done in Word and now is integrated with RIMS. You have Attachment A to Appendix 1, which is the interconnection request information Excel file that was introduced in Cluster 11. So here we're specifying that the technical validation tab within that spreadsheet must contain no errors, and all warnings must be explained should there be any data fields that are identified as a warning, and we'll get into that a bit more later. On the IR validation and comments tab, the first column, column A, must be filled in with yes or NA or include explanations within that column. Going on to the other components, we have your site drawing, single line diagram, reactive power curve, the load flow model, which is using EQC format, the dynamic model in DYD, a plot showing a flat run from the PSLF and screenshots just showing the model running work, and a plot showing the requested megawatt at the point of interconnection from the PSLF. Screenshots are okay there too. So here we have the technical validation tab displaying errors, and this is found in the Appendix A to Attachment 1, the spreadsheet. In this example, we have a transformer data that's missing within the Project Information tab. So when you go into the Technical Validation tab after filling out the Project Information tab, if you click on the button here, the Generated Data Validation check button, the spreadsheet will run some macros that will search for information. It'll look for omitted information. It'll specify if that's an error or if it's just inconsistent information. it'll point out the actual section of the project information tab that has the omitted data, the section, the item, what's wrong, and the change that would be required to fix that. So this technical validation tab can also display warnings where the data may at first glance appear inconsistent based on some of the calculations within the spreadsheet. The technical validation tab is not intended to be a fully comprehensive validation tool. It's designed to list errors and warnings that are obvious. So any warnings that are generated can be explained through the comment section. What we're really going for here is capturing just missing and indisputably wrong data. So here we have an example of the IR validation and comments tab from within the spreadsheet. This is kind of the first portion here. So we're looking for this first column, which would be column A if we had the Excel columns displaying here, to be filled in with yes or not applicable. On the right side here is a portion of the spreadsheet that the ISO and the PTOs fill out when we're reviewing the interconnection request applications and the data submitted. This tab here is really a bit of a checklist for the information that's contained within the project information tab, and is contained in some of the specifics of the items that are required. Here we have a screenshot of a sample flat run from PSLF. And here we have a sample PSLF plot showing megawatt injection at the POI. So let's pause there for any questions.
Marvin, do we have anybody in the queue at the moment?
Yes, we do have a couple of questions here. I'll go to the first.
Your line is now unmuted.
Hi, good afternoon, Jason and Bob. This is Fernando Cornell with Southern California Edison. And I wanted to initially get back into queue when you're talking about the whole maximum cost responsibility section, the real, I think, core of this addendum. Just wanted to recognize the CAISO's really balanced perspective and approach at addressing a very complicated issue. SE appreciates the CAISO looking at this from a multiple party standpoint and really trying to achieve a goal, which is to provide greater cost certainty to interconnection customers, but at the same time balancing the need to mitigate the cost shifting risk to PTOs. You know, some folks may think we operate in a vacuum, but we actually do have a fiduciary responsibility, just like other developers do out there, with respect to managing our risk and financing initiatives that are out there that affect our operations. And so I think subject to looking at the final tariff language that I'm sure will be under development after the CAISO board approval of this initiative, at this point, I just want to acknowledge a very well balanced position or perspective that the CAISO has taken in their approach. I'd like to commend you on where you are today, at least, in moving towards a more realistic trigger, which would be the posting of the third interconnection financial security before disavowing the conditionally assigned network upgrades to later queued customers. So I just want to say thanks for the work you've done on that regard, and just to give you a different perspective from what you've heard earlier on this call. Thank you both.
All right. Thank you, Fernando. Thank you, Fernando.
Any other questions, Marvin?
Go ahead and go to the next question. Caller, your line is unmuted.
Yeah, Susan Schneider. Sorry, this is going to be, I promise, a lot shorter than anything else I have. So you've got 5 business days to get back to people about any kind of incompletion as opposed to validation. And it's only a 2-week window. So if somebody puts in an application, say, at the end of the first week, you are going to get back to them in 5 business days, which is pretty much the end of the second week, which means they really have no time to respond. So I've gotten, at least from some people, some uneasiness about combining this with the fact that it's only 2 weeks now. Might cause people some problems here. I know they're supposed to put in complete applications from the beginning, and that is their responsibility to do. But are you pretty much trying to get people to put in applications April 1st instead of the 15th? Is that more the intent of this?
Hi, Susan. This is Matt. So certainly applications that come in on April 1st will have a greater opportunity to have a bit more in-depth of a review or have a couple turns based on the timelines as proposed. Okay, because anything that comes in after the first week, basically there's no time to fix it if there is some incomplete problem.
Well, actually, there's not a lot of time, but there is some time. It's
How
not
does that happen?
our goal doing this to try to get folks to submit on the 1st. That's always been our preference, but we've never been able to really
Understood.
So even if you think so. But, I guess maybe to fully answer your question, we actually did consider, should we actually extend the window to make it a longer window? But the more we debated it, it just kept coming back to everybody always submits late in the window, so we don't really think that many people would submit early, even with this particular new mechanism in there. So we decided to keep it as it is. If you think differently, you can always, provide something in your comments.
Okay. Well, you may be surprised, but okay. Thanks very much.
Any other questions, Marvin?
So I'm seeing no additional questions at this time.
Okay, so let's move on to the second of the two topics here. Here we have interconnection request validation criteria. And this topic is a bit more concerned with the timelines of the validation process and the activities that are performed during validation. The ISO has determined that based on our experiences in clusters 10 and 11, that the validation process and the timelines as currently written may not necessarily align with the realities of the different types of analysis and the time it takes to perform those analyses. This is highlighted by a few of the trends that we've seen in the previous two clusters. There's been an increase in the volume of interconnection requests that we've received. We have an increased complexity in proposed generating facility arrangements. We have an increase in the number of interconnection requests that are missing application components or that have inconsistent data. What we have here is that we've experienced a bit of a shift of activities that are done to review an application for completeness of the information that's been submitted with the actual technical validation of the information included. So taking the previous topic in combination with this one, we're proposing to modify the interconnection request validation process to utilize the following. So interconnection requests would be submitted during the cluster application window, which is open from April 1st to April 15th. And of course, there's a caveat that if one of those days falls on a non-business day, the next business day would apply. Within 5 business days of receiving an interconnection request application, the ISO will acknowledge the receipt of that application and will either deem the interconnection request package to be complete or deem it incomplete and detail the components that are missing or that had errors that would need to be remedied by April 15th for the package to be deemed complete. So interconnection applications that are not deemed complete by April 15th will not be accepted. But within 10 business days of deeming an interconnection request complete, the CAISO and PTO will then begin the validation process of the data that's included in that submitted interconnection request. The first review of that complete application will occur within those 10 business days, and the outcome will be either the interconnection request is deemed valid, meaning that it's ready to enter the phase 1 study process, or it'll be deemed invalid with, again, a list, details of the items that need correction. The ISO and PTO will then review subsequent submissions of interconnection request information by the interconnection customers within 5 business days. That back and forth process would repeat up until the interconnections requests are deemed valid, and the 5 business day review turnaround time would apply until May 31st. Interconnection requests must be deemed valid and scoping meetings completed no later than June 30th. So here we have the May 31st deadline for a complete interconnection requests pushed back to June 30th. We thought that this aligned with the realities of previous validation processes, and it represented a bit of a balanced approach. Interconnection requests that have not been deemed valid by June 30th or the extended date should the ISO or PTO require additional time on their review prior to May 31st. Those that have not been deemed complete by that time will be withdrawn from the cluster. So one of the items that we wanted to point out here is that we are adding a bit of a flexibility into when scoping meetings occur. We're untangling that from the process where an IR is deemed valid and then scoping meetings occur, because we found it created a bit of a scheduling and a logistical constraint where we could potentially have 75% of interconnection requests that have been deemed valid that are ready for scoping meetings that have those scoping meetings delayed because 25% of interconnection requests have not been deemed valid, and we only have a limited amount of days where we can travel and meet with the PTOs and interconnection customers to hold those scoping meetings. Certainly the intention here isn't to modify the purpose of the scoping meetings and the information that's discussed within those meetings. It's really just to add flexibility within that timeline. So let's move on to an example of what the IR application window and the IR validation process would look like. The IR windows would be announced on March 1st. April 1st, you'd have the actual cluster application window open. It would close on the 15th or the next business day. Between April 1st and 15th, the ISO has 5 business days to review the applications and respond with any deficiencies. The final interconnection request information submitted by interconnection customers for the purposes of having a complete application needs to come in by the 15th, upon which the ISO will still have those 5 business days after the 15th to provide a response. So between essentially April 22nd, including that additional 5 business days after April 15th, and May 31st, the ISO will review the initial submittal of interconnection request information within 10 business days, and then any subsequent submissions will be reviewed within 5 business days up until May 31st. If the ISO exceeds the timelines anywhere within there, there will be a day-for-day extension granted to the June 30th deadline. So the period between May 31st and June 30th is likely when scoping meetings will be held. The day-for-day extensions do not apply within that period. The idea there being that the efforts are between May 31st and June 30th are focused on scoping meetings and final validations. And then after the validation process, you have the commencement of the phase 1 study, which is ultimately the reason why we need to keep the interconnection request application window and the validation process to be as orchestrated and streamlined as possible, while still allowing for the review of data and the back and forth responses that will happen. And so do we have any questions on that the modified interconnection request validation timeline.
So Ina, if you can let us know if anybody's in the queue, we'd appreciate it.
There are no questions in the queue at this time.
So let's go on to next steps. If you do have a question, you can, we'll open it up at the very end. Okay, so we are asking for you to provide written comments. Sorry about the typo on here, but we're looking for written comments on the addendum to the draft final proposal. Those are due by close of business on the 3rd of December. Please submit those to initiativecomments@kaiso.com. So any comments that were provided today, we'd appreciate it if you can include those in your written comments. All the materials related to the IPE are out on the ISO's website under the Stay Informed tab. Go to Stakeholder Processes, and you'll find the IPE initiative linked there. And again, the goal is to take this to the Board of Governors in February at their meeting. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Bob. I'd just like to add that the timing of this is such that we really want to get the Topic 11 components to the board and then to FERC so that we can actually implement them for Cluster 12. If it turns out that the topic number 7.1, continues to enough differences between stakeholders that we may need to continue on, so that is a possibility, just to let everybody know that, we'll just have to see how that plays out. But 11.1 and 11.2 are the ones we definitely want to get to the board and to FERC so we can get approval for that for Cluster 12. We hope to have item 7 as well, but we'll just have to wait and see on that.
So Ina, somebody's entered the queue, you said? So go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Susan Schneider. I appreciate what you said about the section 11 or the item 11 there. I'm wondering if you've got the comment period is less than 2 weeks. We've got Thanksgiving in there, and the 3rd is a Monday. I'm just wondering if maybe for the MCR proposal, which I think is going to be the more complex one, well, it is the more complex one, if maybe we might have through the end of that week, maybe you didn't have having the 3rd be the deadline for the section 11 proposals, and maybe the 7th for the MCR. Would that be possible?
Hold on, we're just having a little sidebar conversation. Hold on.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Susan, you got your wish.
Okay, thank you. Very much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Yeah, the close of business on December 6th.
On the 6th.
10 business days. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thanks very much. Really appreciate it.
Sure. So, Ina, any other questions?
No further questions in the queue.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it. Hope you have a nice holiday, and we'll catch you on the next call. Look forward to your comments. Thanks, Ina.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining today's conference. The call is now concluded, and you may disconnect.